The Agenda with Michael Knight on News Radio 560 KPQ and KPQ.com.
10 minutes past 1 o'clock. Let's meet our very special guest. Charles Steinberg is an attorney at law, and now he's also a candidate for Chelan County Superior Court Judge, position number 3, and he's in our studios today, and we welcome him to KPQ. Charles Steinberg, nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about what made you do this. It's always the first question for a candidate. You must have thought about this for some time, talked it over with your wife and your mentors, and what did you decide?
Well, I talked about it over with my wife and talked it over with some other lawyers in Chelan County. I looked over my vast experience that I've had representing people from all walks of life, representing them in Superior Court, District Court, Federal Court, for the last 24 years in our valley, doing all sorts of different things. And I figured, you know what? I'd be a great choice to be the next Superior Court judge.
When you argue before judges, did you see yourself in them saying, I think they're going to make a wise decision here favorable to me?
Oh, I always pray that justice be done in cases that I have. And I've also sat in the shoes of a neutral arbitrator in the past. I've been a court-appointed arbitrator in matters. And believe you me, it is a total different view when you're the one listening to the evidence and you're the one evaluating the credibility of people on each side or reviewing written declarations and trying to figure out the truth to arrive at a just decision for people. So I don't know that you could always say, I hope the decision's in my favor. I pray for justice to be done.
That's a good prayer.
Yeah.
Now let's look at this business of being an arbitrator. That's a tough business too, because people have agreed to sit down and come to a conclusion. I mean, they don't have to agree to anything, they don't have to sign anything, but they do have to, in good faith, bargain with one another, right, to come to some sort of a solving this problem.
Yeah, that actually refers to mediation. Mediation's when two parties that have a dispute then either hire or bring in a third-party mediator who's got special training to go ahead and basically act as kind of a go-between. Back during the initial Middle East peace conflict between Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, Henry Kissinger did what we call shuttle diplomacy. He would sit down and meet with Henry Kissinger, or he would sit down and meet with Menachem Begin. He'd sit down and meet with Anwar Sadat and see, how they could settle and resolve their disputes. And that's how the Sinai Peninsula dispute actually ended up getting settled. Israel wanted a early warning defense system, and the Egyptians just wanted to be able to claim back their land.
Right.
And they were able to find room for a compromise. And that's what mediators do. As an arbitrator, I'm actually the neutral appointed by the court or as agreed to by the parties to listen to the evidence and then impose a decision. If my decision's wrong as an arbitrator, there are only limited avenues for appeal in the Superior Court rules. And then in trial court, every party has a right to an appeal, to not necessarily get a second whack at the ball, because very few appeals are successful.
Mm-hmm. When you got out of law school, by the way, where'd you go to law school?
I went to law school at Willamette University College of Law in Salem, Oregon.
Right there by the beautiful Willamette River.
Right by the Willamette River. My wife and I were lucky enough to have a house right near the fairgrounds, so we'd be able to walk our dog every Saturday.
As a young man, you made the decision to go into the law, and what was it that drove you in that direction?
Two things actually drove me in that direction. One thing that drove me in that direction is I've always been kind of a larger girthed person. I've always been a little heavy. And one time my friends and I, we were playing King of the Hill at the Maddox's house. And two of my best friends made it to the top of the hill at the same time. And they figured, instead of tie goes to the runner, they figured they'd start fighting. And I finally made my way up to the top, and I held them out, basically got between them and pushed them both aside and said, you know what? There's a better way to solve this. Let's flip a coin. And
the wisdom of Solomon.
Yeah. So that was one of the instances. And the other instances is that this might sound silly to some people, but the name my mom and dad gave me was Charles Raymond. And Charles is named after basically Charlemagne for manly, and Raymond actually means advocate. So even from birth, I was basically destined to be a manly advocate.
Charles the Great, Charlemagne.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but
that's a good, strong name.
Yeah, it is.
Good for you.
It is, yeah. And then my last name, Steinberg, one of my buddies in high school actually gave me the nickname. He gave a loose interpretation of it and called it Stone Mountain.
I got you.
So,
well, in your 20-plus year career, has your attitude toward the law changed? Are you still idealistic?
I would say that I think the law is there for accountability. I don't know that it would be idealistic. I would say the law is there for accountability for people. I would also say that the law is also there to give somebody a fresh start at rehabilitating inappropriate circumstances.
The type of laws that there is to practice in this world are almost infinite.
Yes.
Slight exaggeration, but pretty close. What type of law were you drawn toward, and which is your favorite?
My initial law I was drawn toward was employment law, real estate, and also plaintiff personal injury work. And I do a lot of estate planning as well. I think my favorite areas of law that I do are where I help make a difference in a person's life, whether it be stopping a foreclosure for somebody who's had a unfortunate mishap in their life where they have to go pay a lot of money in medical bills, and we stop foreclosure by doing a Chapter 13 bankruptcy that then gives them 5 years to cure the arrearage so they still have a roof over their head. Or the case of a single mother that comes to mind where by doing a bankruptcy proceeding, she was able to keep a Suburban for her and her 4 kids and pay off the debt over time in spite of being the repossession orders being out there.
Now, there's not a lot of criminal law in there, but as a judge, you're going to be facing some of that, and I know you have a background in that.
I do have a background in criminal law. I think my very first thank you letter that I got from a client, we were able to get him acquitted from assaulting his employee in front of a jury trial in Chelan County, and the thank you note I got back from him was, I hope I never have to use your services for this type of matter ever again. And, I really appreciated that client. And the witnesses had started drinking, I guess, if I recollect that trial correctly, the witnesses had started drinking at 11 a.m.
Got an early start.
And the jurors' eyes just were like wide open. The listeners can't hear this or can't see this, but my eyes opened really wide.
They were wide.
They were wide open. 11 a.m. starting to drink. Yeah. So, and I've also done, I was an investigator intern for the Seattle-King County Public Defender Association, investigating misdemeanors and felony crimes. And then also with Neil Fuller and Steve Clem, I did some criminal work. The constable has to abide by the Constitution. Yes. And has to abide by proper search and seizure laws and rules. I believe the exclusionary rule is well-settled law, and for those of you that don't know what the exclusionary rule is that if the constable doesn't follow the procedures laid out in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to get a search warrant, then the court has an opportunity to suppress that evidence, right. Kind of like the fruit of the poisonous tree. And I believe that's well-settled law, and it's part of the foundations of our democracy, I believe.
When you think about the job that you would be doing as a judge, as a magistrate here in town, what would most of that work entail?
Most of the work, believe it or not, 80% of the workload is criminal and family law. A lot of the work, the legislature actually took away a lot of the discretion on sentencing. We now have a standard sentencing guidelines that all judges in the state need to follow. You look at the person's criminal history, you give them an offender score. You look to see if there are certain aggravating factors for an upward deviation in the sentence or a downward deviation in the sentence for criminal matters. Family law is where it's really, really important to have good judges, to be able to listen to the evidence very clearly, have a realistic basis in what to do for these folks that can't get along with raising their child, or what to do with what the child support guidelines are in matters. So that's about 80% of the work. And by being a business owner for the past 22 years in Chelan County, by being an advocate for people, both really low-income people and also higher-income people, and also pro bono work, it really gives you a different perspective in life by being here for 24 years.
You find that you're a good campaigner?
I find that, yeah, I think I'm a good campaigner. I enjoy getting out and meeting people and talking to people about what they think about the justice system in Chelan County. I think I got my signs up before Apple Blossom was one of our goals for my team, was to get the blue signs up before Apple Blossom, and we got some 4x8s up thanks to generous business owners in the valley that support me.
It's something that you have to ask for as a candidate. You have to ask for support. You have to ask for the vote, things that I don't think I could do.
Yeah, you have to ask for support. You have to ask for places people to put yard signs out. You have to ask for endorsements. We have to ask, believe it or not, judges are prohibited from actually asking for campaign contributions on their own behalf. The committee can ask for campaign donations, but a judge is actually prohibited, because there's an appearance of a problem there. It might appear that justice is for sale.
Well, it's hard to be a candidate for the judgeship, because the two worlds don't interlace very well. One is dignified and rule bound, and one is unseemly with no rules whatsoever. When you run for office, it's the Wild West.
Yes, for a partisan position, it very much is the Wild West, and running for judge is a nonpartisan position. The canons of judicial conduct do apply to judicial candidates. We're not supposed to comment at all on issues that might come before us. So yeah, you're right. It's less than the Wild West.
Just the Wild West, not the Wild West.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the people of Chelan County have expectations of what their judges should be doing and what their courts should be doing. Are they realistic expectations, and do they have a good grip on what the job really is about?
I think in talking to the different voters and talking to the taxpayers of our valley, many of them have a very good idea of what it is. A lot of them, the feedback I've been getting from, they want a judge that upholds the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They're very strong on that. Other folks that houses I've doorbelled have said, I'm a felon. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Steinberg, I'm not allowed to vote, but I will be sure your literature gets to those of us registered voters here, or those of the registered voters at this house that are able to vote. And it's very humbling to go out doorbelling and ask people for their vote or their support or a place just for a yard sign.
And when you do knock on the door and they say, "Oh yeah, I've seen your signs. I see you're running for office for the judgeship," what's the conversation like? What did they have questions for you that are timely? For
the most part, when I'm ringing the doorbell and people come to the door, for some people there's some confusion because I'm running against Governor Jay Inslee's appointee, Kristen Ferreira, and then Travis Brandt is running against Governor Inslee's appointee, Robert McSeveny. But then there are a lot of other signs in our valley, and they want to know, well, what are these other positions about? And I'm grateful for KPQ to be willing to have all of us candidates on at different times.
We're trying to get them all.
Yeah, but my race is just against Kristen Ferreira, and Travis Brandt is just against Robert McSeveny. And then in district court, it's a three-way race with Roberto Castro and Alan Blackman and Kyle Mott.
There you go.
Yeah.
So it's a busy field.
It's a very busy field, and there's it's kind of fun to see the little different yard signs and political signs sticking up in the different slogans on them. I ran for Superior Court judge against Alicia Nakata 6 years ago, and when I ran against Judge Nakata, I was only in the race for 80 days, maybe 90 days. And my slogan then was "Experience Matters." And here, experience does matter. And having worked and lived in the valley for 24 years, I'd ask the voters to put my experience to work for them.
And there's no other way to get that experience, is there? It's only time that'll provide it. Anyone can say experience counts, and I'm sure in your case it's true. But without those 20 years, there wouldn't be the experience that you're banking on.
Yeah, without the 24 years experience, the court's has appointed me in the past to be an independent guardian ad litem, to go in and investigate cases to see if this person can no longer take care of themselves. They're some of the most vulnerable in our society. Who the right person to take care of would be, to do a report and let the judge make up the mind about who should take care of this person. if the person has been financially exploited, because sometimes there are black sheep in the family that
Sure.
might have their hand in the cookie jar or the bank account. You need people that are willing to stand up and protect those people. It's even in the news with as recently as Marvel Comics.
Oh, yes, Stan Lee.
Yeah, Stan Lee. There's currently a guardianship going on against involving him because I believe it's a 41-year-old comic book memorabilia collector from New York. After Stan Lee's wife passed away last year, this comic book collector from New York moved in with him and started making business decisions for him.
Making breakfast.
Yeah, making breakfast.
Hopefully.
And there are a lot of people around Stan Lee that are very much concerned and brought a guardianship proceeding there. Here in Washington State, even people might remember Casey Kasem, American Top 40.
I remember that crossed my mind when you mentioned Stan Lee.
Yeah, and there was a dispute over who should have custody of Stan Lee. Not Stan Lee, of Casey Kasem. And it's a fight. It was a fight between the biological daughters and the stepmother.
And the stepmother took him out of the country.
Out of the state of California. Yeah. And the daughters were very upset that he was receiving medical care and treatment, is my understanding of what happened up in San Juan Islands.
The law career is a long one. You can practice law as long as you want, as long as you think that you have your marbles.
Yeah, it's not like an airline pilot.
No, and I like that because the experience and the seasoning becomes not so subtle. I mean, you've seen everything, you've done everything, and you know how to proceed. And that must be a comfort to your clients because when people come to you so often, you probably see in their eyes, they're a bit upset.
Yeah, the clients are a bit upset. Someone has done them wrong, and they want to be vindicated. In our justice system, sometimes you can get that, and sometimes you can't get the vindication. Other times, when at least as an advocate, or when I've been an arbitrator handing down a decision, I like to get the sense that justice has been done. Litigants want to be heard. They've got a story to be told, and they want to be heard.
What's the future for a judgeship? How do you mature once you're elected? What do you think the steps are, and what does a judge learn in these first couple of years?
Well, the first couple of years, you'd end up learning. Of course, there's mandatory education in Washington State for all judges. You get to go to a judge training school, but mainly a lot of things have to do with having good judicial temperament, good demeanor. If a litigant gets out of control and decides to start cussing and swear at you, you need to be very thick-skinned and deal with that appropriately and not overreact.
Like we see on Law and Order.
Yeah.
Of course, those are New York judges.
Yeah.
They're a little looser than we are here.
Yeah.
Do you see this as I know it's a legal position, but is it also political because there's a race involved and people want to make sure, well, what do they want to make sure of? They ask you what you believe, who you voted for, what your views about this and that and the other thing?
Most people respect that it's a nonpartisan position. Some people, I got a very last-minute invitation to a candidate forum that I hadn't been invited to until about 5 minutes before the forum started. And I showed up about 2 or 3 weeks ago on Wednesday. Anyway, there was a question from the audience wanting to know my religious views and things like that. And, my religious views, they don't have a part in our constitutional framework of applying the facts and the law as an impartial magistrate do.
And it's important to state that.
Yeah, it's very important to state that. I mean, I've won awards for my land use advocacy, and when King County was fighting a battle against churches and private schools and individuals, King County actually said you can't have churches or private schools in rural areas of King County.
You just can't have them?
You can't have them. You can't build a new one, and you can't remodel existing ones.
So it wasn't a moratorium, it was just a ban.
It was both. It was a moratorium because they were actually afraid. They were actually I believe they were religious. The council, King County Council, was religiously discriminatory against the Catholic Church that had owned a lot of land up by Snoqualmie Falls, and they wanted to build a retreat center. And the county council caught wind of that, and so they enacted a moratorium saying no religious schools, no religious institutions can build or get a building permit at all. And Bill Clinton had passed a law called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. That's a mouthful, and my eyes probably glaze over too. But the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 1994 that put council members personally on the hook for damages, money damages, if they were found to be discriminatory in a land use decision based on a person's faith. And I got to eyeball every single council member at a hearing and say, that's each one of you that voted for this moratorium. You're on the hook for money damages. In the Maple Valley Community Church, they had closed on a building construction loan, and so they were already paying interest. They'd already done the pre-planning meetings, and then were told, no, there's moratoriums in effect, and because your multi-purpose room has a religious purpose to it, you can't build. And the result of all our advocacy, and it wasn't just me advocating, but the result of the advocacy was that the King County decided to enact the religious freedom parts of our Constitution into the King County Land Use Code.
Hey,
it was already part of our. It's already part of our law. It's already in the Constitution.
Had to write it one more time.
Yeah.
We're speaking with Charles Steinberg. He's a candidate for Chelan County Superior Court judge. He's an attorney at law here in town. He's running for position number 3, and we're at the end of our time, I'm sorry. But there's one more thing to do, and that's I always ask the candidates to ask the people of Chelan County for their vote.
Yes. If you go to my website, votesteinberg.com, there's more information, and I ask you to consider voting for me.